The car's engine hummed softly, a low rumble beneath the weight of silence that hung between us. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles pale, as the rain streaked across the windshield like tears on a lover's face. Ezra, my brother's best friend, sat in the passenger seat, his presence a quiet storm I hadn't expected to face tonight. It was late September in Asheville, North Carolina, the kind of evening where the air smelled of damp leaves and unspoken promises. My brother, Caleb, had called me an hour ago, his voice slurred from one too many beers at a downtown bar. "Yo, Lucas, can you pick up Ezra? He's stranded, and I'm not exactly sober." I'd groaned, already halfway into my sweatpants and a rerun of some mindless sitcom, but Caleb's pleading tone, and the fact that I owed him for covering my rent last month, had me pulling on my sneakers and grabbing my keys. Ezra and I weren't strangers, but we weren't friends either. He'd been a fixture in our lives since high school, always at Caleb's side, the two of them inseparable like the mountains and the sky. At 27, Ezra was 2 years older than me, with sharp cheekbones, deep-set hazel eyes, and a quiet intensity that made you feel like he saw more than he let on. He was the kind of guy who could walk into a room and make everyone feel a little less steady, a little more aware of themselves. I'd always kept my distance, not because I didn't like him, but because I didn't trust myself around him. There was something about Ezra that tugged at the edges of my carefully guarded heart. "Thanks for this, Lucas," he said finally, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I didn't mean to drag you out." "No big deal," I lied, my eyes fixed on the windshield wiper's rhythmic dance. "Caleb's always getting himself into messes. Guess it's my job to clean them up." Ezra let out a soft laugh, the sound warm and unexpected. "Yeah, he's a handful. Always has been." The silence returned, heavier this time, punctuated only by the patter of rain and the occasional squeak of the wipers. I stole a glance at him, his profile illuminated by the passing streetlights. His jaw was tight, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. Something was off, but I couldn't place it. Ezra was usually all easy smiles and quick wit, the guy who could charm a room without trying. Tonight he seemed unraveling. "You okay?" I asked, my voice softer than I meant it to be. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to look out the window, his reflection a ghost in the glass. "Just a rough night," he said finally. "Had a fight with someone." "Someone?" I raised an eyebrow, trying to keep my tone light. "Like a boyfriend?" Ezra's head snapped toward me, his eyes wide for a split second before he caught himself. "No," he said quickly. "Just a friend. Nobody important." I nodded, but my chest tightened. I'd heard the rumors about Ezra, whispers from Caleb's friends, half-joking comments about how he'd never settled down with anyone, how he always seemed to keep people at arm's length. I'd never asked, never wanted to know. But sitting here, inches away from him, I couldn't help but wonder. The road stretched on, the city lights fading into the darker, quieter streets of the suburbs. We were halfway to Ezra's apartment when he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "You ever feel like you're hiding something from everyone? Like, if they knew the real you, they'd, I don't know, run." My breath caught. I knew that feeling too well. The weight of a secret you carried like a stone in your chest. The fear that one wrong move could shatter everything. I'd come out to Caleb 2 years ago, and while he'd been supportive in his own clumsy way, I hadn't told anyone else. Not my parents, not my coworkers, not the guys I played pickup basketball with on weekends. I was Lucas, the dependable younger brother, the graphic designer with a steady job and a predictable life. But beneath that, I was someone else. Someone who'd spent years dodging questions about girlfriends, someone who'd felt his heart race at the sight of a man's smile. "Yeah," I admitted, my voice rough. "I know what that's like." Ezra turned to look at me, his eyes searching mine in the dim light. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air in the car felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. Then, as if testing the waters, he said, "I've been hiding something too." My heart pounded, but before I could respond, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. Caleb's name flashed on the screen. I ignored it, but the moment was broken. Ezra looked away, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Guess we're both good at keeping secrets," he said, a bitter edge to his voice. The rest of the drive was quiet, but the tension between us lingered, a thread stretched taut. When I pulled up to his apartment complex, a squat brick building tucked behind a row of pines, Ezra didn't move to get out. Instead, he turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Lucas," he said, his voice steady now, "can I ask you something?" I nodded, my throat tight. "Sure." He hesitated, then leaned closer, his eyes locking onto mine. "If I told you something big, would you keep it between us?" I didn't know what he was about to say, but I knew it would change everything. The rain slowed to a drizzle, the world outside blurring into insignificance. In that moment, it was just me and Ezra, two people carrying secrets too heavy to hold alone. "I would," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I promise." Ezra's lips parted, but before he could speak, headlights flashed behind us. A car pulled into the lot, its horn blaring as it swerved around us. The spell broke, and Ezra shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe another time," he said, grabbing his bag and opening the door. "Thanks for the ride, Lucas." As he disappeared into the building, I sat there, the engine still running, my heart racing like I'd just run a marathon. I didn't know what Ezra had been about to say, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the last time we'd see each other like this. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Caleb banging around in the kitchen. My apartment, a small one-bedroom in a converted warehouse, felt too small for the thoughts crowding my head. Last night's drive with Ezra replayed in my mind like a song stuck on repeat. The way his voice had cracked when he mentioned hiding something, the way his eyes had held mine like he was searching for an anchor. "Yo, Lucas, you alive?" Caleb called, poking his head into my room. At 29, my brother was a taller, louder version of me. Same brown curls, same freckles across the nose, but with a grin that could disarm anyone. He was holding a mug of coffee, his hair still wet from a shower. "Thanks for grabbing Ezra last night. Dude owes you one." I mumbled something non-committal, pulling on a hoodie to hide the flush creeping up my neck. Caleb didn't notice, he never did. He launched into a story about the bar, something about a spilled drink and a near fight, but I was only half listening. My mind was still in that car, still caught in the moment Ezra almost told me his secret. Work was a blur. I spent the day at my desk in a cramped design firm downtown, tweaking logos for a local brewery while my thoughts drifted to Ezra. By the time I left the office, the sky was bruised with clouds, and a restless energy buzzed under my skin. I needed to see him again, not to push, but to understand. Something about last night felt unfinished, like a sentence cut off mid-breath. Ezra's apartment wasn't far, just a 15-minute drive through Asheville's winding streets. I told myself I was just checking in, making sure he was okay after whatever had shaken him up. But as I parked outside his building, my palms were sweaty, and my heart was doing that stupid fluttering thing again. I knocked on his door, half expecting him to not answer. When he did, he looked surprised, his hazel eyes widening before softening into something warmer. He was in a faded t-shirt and jeans, his hair slightly mussed, like he'd been running his hands through it. "Lucas?" he said, stepping aside to let me in. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, I scrambled for an excuse. Caleb mentioned you had a rough night. Thought I'd check in." His apartment was small but cozy, with bookshelves overflowing and a guitar propped against the wall. A single lamp cast a warm glow over the room, and the faint smell of incense lingered in the air. Ezra gestured to the couch, and I sat, feeling oddly out of place. "You didn't have to do that," he said, sitting across from me in an armchair. "But I'm glad you're here." The words hung between us, heavy with meaning. I wanted to ask about last night, about what he'd almost said, but the weight of his gaze stopped me. Instead, I said, "You seemed off. In the car. I just wanted to make sure you're good." Ezra leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his fingers laced together. "I'm not great at talking about this stuff," he admitted. "But yeah, last night was a lot." He told me about the fight. Not with a friend, as he'd claimed, but with his ex, a guy named Marcus who'd shown up at the bar unannounced. Marcus had been Ezra's first serious relationship, a whirlwind that ended badly 6 months ago. "He keeps trying to pull me back in," Ezra said, his voice low. "But I'm done. I have to be." I nodded, my throat tight, hearing Ezra talk about Marcus, about being with another guy, made my own secret feel closer to the surface like a bubble about to burst. "That sounds rough," I said. "I'm sorry." Ezra shook his head. "Don't be. It's hard, you know? Being out, but not really. My family doesn't know. Most of my friends don't either. Caleb does." But he trailed off, his eyes flicking to mine. "I don't know why I'm telling you this." "Because I asked," I said simply. "And because I get it." He looked at me then, really looked like he was seeing me for the first time. "You do, don't you?" he said softly. "Lucas, are you?" I froze. The question hung in the air, unfinished but unmistakable. My heart pounded, and for a moment, I considered lying, brushing it off with a laugh. But something in Ezra's expression, open, vulnerable, unguarded, made me want to be brave. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely audible. "I am." The silence that followed was electric. Ezra didn't move, didn't speak, but his eyes never left mine. Then, slowly, he stood and crossed the room, sitting beside me on the couch. Our knees brushed, and the contact sent a jolt through me. "I didn't know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I wondered, but I didn't know." I laughed, a shaky sound. "Yeah, well, I'm good at keeping secrets, remember?" He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that could unravel you, soft and sharp all at once. "Guess we both are." We talked for hours, the conversation flowing like a river breaking free. He told me about growing up in a small town outside Raleigh, where being gay wasn't something you admitted out loud. I told him about the panic attacks I'd had in college, the fear of being found out. It was like we were peeling back layers, exposing parts of ourselves we'd kept hidden for too long. By the time I left, the sky was dark, and my heart felt lighter than it had in years. Ezra walked me to the door, his hand brushing mine as he said goodnight. The touch lingered, a promise of something more. The next few weeks were a blur of stolen moments. Ezra and I texted constantly, our conversations a mix of playful banter and raw honesty. We met up when we could, coffee at a quiet cafe, walks through the Blue Ridge Parkway, late-night drives to nowhere. Each moment felt like a step closer to something I couldn't name, something that scared me as much as it thrilled me. Caleb, oblivious as ever, didn't notice the shift. He'd invite Ezra over for game nights, and I'd find myself watching him across the room, catching his eye and feeling my pulse race. It was dangerous, this thing growing between us, but I couldn't stop it any more than I could stop the seasons from changing. One evening, we ended up at a local park, the same one where I'd later imagined that wooden signpost. The air was crisp, the leaves a riot of red and gold. We sat on a bench, our shoulders touching, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Ezra's hand rested on the bench, inches from mine, and I felt the pull to close the distance. "Lucas," he said, his voice soft but serious. "What are we doing?" I looked at him, my heart in my throat. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I don't want to stop." He turned to face me, his eyes searching. "Me neither. But this isn't easy. Not for me, not with my family, not with everything." I nodded, understanding the weight of his words. My own parents were traditional, the kind who asked about grandkids and expected me to settle down with a nice girl someday. Coming out to them felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, and I wasn't sure I was ready to jump. "I'm scared too," I said, "but when I'm with you, it feels right." Ezra's breath hitched, and before I could think, he leaned in, his lips brushing mine. The kiss was tentative at first, then deeper, a collision of need and fear and hope. When we pulled apart, the world felt different, like a puzzle piece had finally clicked into place. But the moment didn't last. A shout from across the park startled us. A group of teenagers, laughing and tossing a frisbee. We pulled apart, the spell broken, but the warmth of his touch lingered. That night, I lay awake, replaying the kiss, the feel of his hand in mine. I wanted more moments, more honesty, more of him. But the fear was still there, a shadow at the edge of every thought. The next day, Ezra called me, his voice tight. "Marcus showed up again," he said. "At my work this time." I gripped the phone, my stomach churning. What did he want? To talk. To, I don't know, fix things. Ezra sighed. I told him it's over, but he's not listening. He keeps saying he knows me, knows what I need. Anger flared in my chest, hot and sharp. He doesn't get to decide that. I know, Ezra said, but it's messing with my head, and I'm worried he'll do something stupid. He's not exactly stable. I wanted to drive to Ezra's place, to stand between him and Marcus, to protect this fragile thing we were building. But I knew it wasn't that simple. Ezra needed to face his past, just like I needed to face mine. "Let me come over," I said. "We'll figure it out together." He hesitated, then agreed. When I arrived, he looked exhausted, his eyes shadowed. We sat on his couch, closer than we needed to be, and talked through the night. He told me about Marcus's jealousy, his controlling nature, the way he'd made Ezra feel small. I told him about my own fears, losing my family, my job, my place in the world. "We're a mess, aren't we?" Ezra said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah," I said, smiling back, "but maybe we're a good kind of mess." He laughed, and for the first time in days, the tension eased. We fell asleep on the couch, our hands intertwined, the world outside fading into insignificance. The weeks that followed were a tightrope walk. Ezra and I grew closer, our connection deepening with every shared glance, every quiet confession. But the shadow of Marcus loomed, a reminder that love, no matter how real, wasn't without its challenges. One night, Caleb invited us both to a bonfire at his place. a sprawling backyard on the edge of town. The air was thick with the smell of burning wood and autumn chill. Ezra and I kept our distance, playing the part of casual friends, but every brush of his arm against mine felt like a secret shared. As the night wore on, Caleb pulled me aside, his brow furrowed. "You and Ezra seem close lately," he said, his tone curious but not accusing. I shrugged, my heart racing. "He's a good guy. We've been hanging out." Caleb studied me, then nodded. "Just be careful, man. Ezra's got a lot of baggage." I wanted to tell him then, to spill everything, about the kiss, about the nights we'd spent talking, about the way Ezra made me feel like I could be myself for the first time. But the words stuck in my throat, and I just nodded. The bonfire ended with Caleb passing out on a lawn chair, leaving Ezra and me to clean up. We worked in silence, stacking cups and tossing bottles into a recycling bin. When we were done, Ezra grabbed my hand, pulling me behind the shed, out of sight. "Lucas," he whispered, his breath warm against my cheek. "I'm falling for you. Hard." My heart stopped, then started again, faster. "Me too," I said, my voice shaking. "But what do we do about it?" He didn't answer with words. Instead, he kissed me, fierce and desperate, like he was afraid I'd disappear. I kissed him back, pouring everything I felt into that moment. The fear, the hope, the love I hadn't dared name until now. But the next day, everything changed. I got a text from Ezra, short and frantic. "Marcus knows about us. He followed me last night." Panic clawed at my chest. I called Ezra, my hands shaking as I waited for him to pick up. When he did, his voice was strained. "He saw us at the bonfire," he said. "He's threatening to tell everyone. My family, my boss, everyone, unless I meet with him." "Don't go," I said, my voice sharp. "He's trying to control you." "I know," Ezra said, "but I have to end this. For good." I didn't like it, but I knew he was right. Marcus was a storm that wouldn't pass until Ezra faced it head-on. We agreed to meet at a diner downtown, a neutral place where Marcus couldn't cause a scene. I insisted on coming, not trusting Marcus to play fair. The diner was crowded, the air thick with the smell of grease and coffee. Ezra and I sat in a booth, our knees touching under the table. When Marcus walked in, I felt Ezra tense beside me. Marcus was tall, with a sharp jaw and cold blue eyes that seemed to cut through the room. He slid into the booth across from us, his smile all teeth. "So," Marcus said, leaning back, "this is the new guy?" Ezra's hand found mine under the table, squeezing tight. "This is Lucas," he said, his voice steady. "And you need to leave us alone." Marcus laughed, a harsh sound. "You think you can just walk away? After everything?" "I'm done, Marcus," Ezra said. "I've moved on. You need to do the same." Marcus's smile faded, replaced by something darker. "You'll regret this," he said, standing. "Both of you." He left, but his words lingered, a threat that hung over us like a storm cloud. That night, Ezra stayed at my place, both of us too shaken to be alone. We lay in bed, not touching, just listening to each other's breathing. I wanted to promise him everything would be okay, but I didn't know if it was true. The days that followed were tense, each one a waiting game. Marcus didn't contact Ezra again, but the fear of what he might do lingered. I started noticing things: strange cars parked near my apartment, anonymous messages on Ezra's social media. It was subtle, but it was there, a reminder that Marcus wasn't done with us. One evening, Ezra came to me with a plan. "I need to tell my family," he said, his voice resolute. If Marcus is going to try to use this against me, I want to be the one to say it first. I admired his courage, but I was terrified for him. I knew what it was like to stand on that precipice, to face the possibility of losing the people you loved most. Are you sure? I asked. He nodded. I'm tired of hiding, and I want them to know about you. My heart swelled, but the fear didn't go away. I agreed to go with him, to stand by his side when he told his parents. We drove to Raleigh the next weekend, the 2-hour trip filled with nervous silence and fleeting glances. Ezra's parents lived in a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. When we arrived, Ezra's mom, a kind woman with Ezra's hazel eyes, welcomed us with hugs and homemade cookies. His dad, a gruff man with a salt and pepper beard, shook my hand and asked about my job. It was all so normal, so warm, that I almost forgot why we were there. After dinner, Ezra took a deep breath and told them. He didn't sugarcoat it, didn't hesitate. I'm gay, he said, his voice steady. And Lucas, he's more than a friend. He's someone I care about. The room went silent. His mom's eyes filled with tears, but she reached for Ezra's hand, squeezing it tightly. I just want you to be happy, she said, her voice breaking. His dad was harder to read. He sat back, his face unreadable, then stood and left the room. Ezra's shoulders slumped, but his mom pulled him into a hug, whispering words I couldn't hear. When his dad returned, he was holding an old photo album. He sat beside Ezra and opened it, showing pictures of Ezra as a kid, smiling, carefree, loved. I don't understand everything, his dad said gruffly, but you're my son. That doesn't change. Tears streamed down Ezra's face, and I felt my own eyes sting. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, a step toward acceptance, toward a future where Ezra didn't have to hide. When we got back to Asheville, something had shifted. Ezra was lighter, like a weight had been lifted, but the threat of Marcus still lingered. A week later, it came to a head. Marcus showed up at Ezra's apartment, drunk and angry, banging on the door. I was there and we called the police. By the time they arrived, Marcus was gone, but Ezra filed a restraining order the next day. It wasn't the end of our problems, but it was a turning point. Ezra and I started building a life together, one small moment at a time. We told Caleb, who took it better than I expected, his only complaint being that we hadn't told him sooner. Slowly, I started coming out to others, my coworkers, my friends, even my parents, who were hesitant but willing to listen. The car ride that started it all felt like a lifetime ago, but it was the spark that changed everything. Ezra and I weren't perfect, and the world wasn't always kind, but we had each other. And in the end, that was enough. We stood together in that park again, months later, under the same oak tree where we'd shared our first kiss. Ezra took my hand, his fingers warm against mine. We made it, he said, his voice full of wonder. Yeah, I said, smiling. We did. And as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I knew we'd keep fighting for each other, for the life we wanted, for the love we'd found in the most unexpected of places.